Let's talk about some great fires, often touched upon and squinted at with suspicion when we talk about our history. And this is also something I've been looking at for a great deal of time and really trying to sift through and take a balanced approach at this subject and come to some sort of definitive idea, or at least closer to it. This is still an ongoing investigation for me. I have reached no conclusion yet. I think I've narrowed down to about 4 possibilities, which are pretty common sense, honestly. Nothing too groundbreaking there. But I thought I'd give you some insight on how the investigation is going and why it's difficult to investigate this. So it begins with a spreadsheet that I have been constructing. And I'd say I'm about a quarter of the way through gathering the data that I would like to gather, to the tune of, let's see what we're at, about 250 fires or so. And I initially plugged these into a timeline because I was trying to determine if there's anything suspicious at all about these fires, or is it just normal humanity. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm very familiar with the obvious facts that when you have wooden buildings and you have heating and lighting sources that are primarily candles and primarily flame, there will be a preponderance of fires. When you have primitive firefighting techniques and you have more primitive forms of communication, there will be more fires that potentially could spread further. These are all realities I accept. And I've had no less than my lifetime 3 house fires. 2 of them I was able to put out. One I really just lost my piano, and I left a candle on overnight. Just a candle. It was in a holder. I saw no reason why it would start a fire, but somehow it melted funny, and it just did. And that one was a struggle to put out. Actually, the dog woke me up. Well, actually, prior to that, a roommate had put a shirt on top of a lampshade, and that had caught on fire, and I was able to put that one out. Years later, I had a guest house that caught on fire due to some unknown reason, really. Probably most likely a spark or something from an old window-mounted air conditioner must have caught the drapes. There was nothing else even on or electric at all in that time, and that was pretty bad too. But the whole guest house burned down along with everything. It had a ton of stuff in it, and it almost caught the main house. So I guess the only point of telling you this is that I'm familiar with the reality of the fire. I'm familiar with how quickly it can happen, how possible it really is with just a small set of circumstances. So my only point in telling you this is that I'm looking at this from a realist point of view. It could happen to anyone at any time. With the experience I've had personally, I do believe that to be true. So is there anything suspicious at all about some of these stories that we see everywhere? How prevalent are they? And are there any red flags as far as the narrative goes that would make us believe that there's some manipulation going on in our histories? And so it started with me plugging in. Initially, I went to just a few sources online and searched for many great fires as I could find. And I plugged them all into this timeline to see if there's anything suspicious about this. And I'll let you be the judge of it here. Beginning down here in 1666, I don't think you see this very well. Maybe you can't. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter because, as you can see, at least as things that we call the Great Fires, prior to the 1800s, there are not very many. There's a few sprinkled in here, but it really picks up around 1850, and to no one's great surprise, it continues on very heavily to the 1900s, and then sort of starts to peter off. And now I didn't really look past 1950 once this clearly started to be the case. There's only a handful of them that I could find that were the Great Fires and sort of thing. Once this became clear, this is the time period in which I began starting to look primarily. Now there are hundreds of these that are referred to as the Great Fire, and then some of them that are just referred to as the fire. There seems to be no actual qualifier as to what a Great Fire is. Some of them burn 300 buildings, some of them burn 80,000, and everywhere in between. So there's no real science to the name behind it. And so I started sort of lumping them all together. And we'll go through some of these, but I just wanted to show you to give you an idea of how it works. So what I'm trying to do is gather the location, the date over here, the amount of buildings or the amount of the town that was destroyed, how it started, the casualty number, was there a fire department, were there explosions involved, the aftermath, any pertinent notes, and then I've included some links over here. So like I said, I'm about a quarter of the way through where I'd like to be. The red ones here are war-related fires, so I kind of ruled those out. The blue ones are all North America, Canada, United States, I think Puerto Rico, because I feel like this timeline, this area falls more in line with the investigation I do around the surrounding United States. Europe and some of these other countries, they're in white. I didn't ignore them. I just indicated with the blue, the ones that were American. Some of these, like this little yellow one, is an explosion, and some of these yellow ones here down here are just a mill fire, which is actually part of a different project that I'm working on. But so as you can see, there are quite a few. 250, I believe, so far, what I have. And like I said, it's still very incomplete. But I just thought I would give you a little peek into the insight and how it's going and show you why it is difficult to research in a way. And are there any conclusions that I have come to based on what I see so far? I'm not going to focus too much on the photographs yet, at least in this edition. I might look at some of those down the line. But these great fires seem to have been going on since the dawning of time. Here is a picture of the Great Fire of the Dinosaurs. You may remember on this channel a few years back when I broke the story of the Great Fire of Emerald City and the Great Fire of Gondor. So it was ever since then that my curiosity was piqued. Once I learned how Middle-earth suffered, I had to see how the rest of the world would do. As it turns out, there's no real definitive list of fires or great fires. While Wikipedia seems to be designed that way, when you go in through the back door, you can see this is a list of all the town and city fires here. So this is where I began gathering some of these. While most people associate the Great Fire with the first one in London, 1666, which actually, hilariously, I have a board game called The Great Fire of London 1666, where as players you are attempting to put out fires in areas that you control, that you own, you have ownership of, and while meanwhile kind of sometimes actually allowing areas to burn that belong to your opponents. It's kind of a funny game, but it's that's the first one that we associate with. But you can see here the Great Fire of Stockholm Fire, Istanbul. There were others before that, and this Great Fire thing isn't limited to America at all. They're all over. It's the Great Fire of Gouda, and I know most people pronounce it Gouda, but I'm told it's actually Gouda. Second Great Fire of Amsterdam. There's a Great Fire in China, and so this Great Fire thing goes way back. You would think this list would be definitive, but it falls completely short. And they separate these from wildfires and things, and mine fires and that sort of other thing. Well, if you go into the back door of Scriptopedia and try to look at some of the categories, like I said, this is set up for it, but fires by country, and there's just very few countries. And even the urban fires in the United States is woefully short. Even when they separate them by town, 1908 fires in the United States you might find 3. Here I've got 5 on this list, 6. I guess one's Canada, so I've got 5, and none of these 5 are represented on that list. So there's no really, that I could find, comprehensive list of all these fires. And furthermore, you have, say, for example, this Great Boston Fire here. Here you got a 300-page book about the Great Fire in Boston, 1872. And you'll often find that some of these fires literally have books written about them. Yet Scriptopedia tells you that the Great Fire was in 1711. And then they'll tell you down here there were several great fires, including one in 1653, 1676, 1679, 1682, and 1691. Although then they became eclipsed by the fire of 1711, which became thereafter known as the Great Fire. Of course, until the Great Fire of 1842, then the other one in 1852. So it's very difficult because it's like, well, okay, tell me about these fires. And often they're just casually mentioned. And this is something that happens over and over again. And I'm only showing you this minutia so that you understand that this is why it's very difficult to kind of do this research in a way, because there's a lot of dead ends and there's a lot of just events that are vaguely alluded to and a lot of really incomplete information. I can't find the link here, but one of these is a link to Encyclopedia Britannica from 1911, in which it is stated that there was a fire in Constantinople at one point that killed 40,000 people. Yeah, when I looked at the population of the city at the time, it was 30 to 35,000. So I don't know how fire literally kills everyone. So some of these things and they don't really make sense. There's a number of them that just seem absolutely questionable in the amount of casualties and the amount of buildings destroyed. And many times it'll say the entire town or the entire city was destroyed or almost completely destroyed. It'll be very vague, such as the fire in Detroit, when which I actually learn, yeah, the whole city burned down, but the population at the time was only 6,000. So it sounds a lot worse than it is when you think about Detroit compared to today. Sometimes they're very specific, such as 1,572 buildings burned here in St. John's in 1892, and sometimes they'll just say things like 1,000,000 acres, or 3 towns, or all buildings but 2. Sometimes these stories are completely unreliable, or you'll have one account that says 1,900 buildings destroyed, or another account says 4,200 buildings destroyed. Then there are some absolutely devastating fires that happened in Japan, where we are told, here, this one in Tokyo in 1881, where 20,000 buildings were destroyed, which is close to the Chicago fire, where 17,000 buildings are burned. Now, how do you know if that compares to, say, this one in Finland, where 95% of the town was burned? It's hard to say because the way that they chronicled the data is inconsistent. This one, they'll tell you how many buildings were burned. This one, they'll say a third of the city. They won't tell you how it's difficult to find out how big the city was at the time. This one in Japan, where 37,000 buildings were destroyed in 1788, allegedly. apparently, which just seems absolutely, to even have 37,000 buildings in 1788 seems unlikely in one city. So what conclusions have I come to about some of this? Well, let's go through some of these and find out. As far as the origin goes, there are some recurring themes that seem to pop up again and again that are of suspicion to me, and also the aftermath of these stories. So I will just begin to go through some of these and show you exactly what I mean here. And we'll start with the Great Boston Fire here. In 1711, we are told fires were a regular feature because wood was generally the most common material used for houses. We are told in 1679, so quite early, the court passed its building regulation by mandating any new dwelling be made of stone or brick. So they are aware of this by 1679, this danger. And yet, despite these provisions, wooden buildings remained predominant well into the 18th century. 2/3 of the houses were made of timber. So this fire in particular, a Scottish woman named Mary Morse accidentally starts a fire, and you will see that it is almost always a woman that is blamed or an immigrant, which is just interesting. We're told a substantial portion of Pudding Lane was devastated, and only 100 houses. So this is the Great Fire, only 100 houses. Well, that's a lot, but this says 10 years later there were 3,000 houses in the city, so why this is a Great Fire, I'm not certain. Several deaths, and others were killed from using gunpowder to blow up homes. The burnt area was quickly rebuilt. New brick houses are mentioned. They made some changes to the fire department. Then down here you're told it was the Great Fire, but then it was overshadowed by the Great Boston Fire of 1760, and then the Greater Boston Fire of 1872. So, the term just seems to be used so ridiculously. Oddly enough, the Great Fire of London also began on a bakery in Pudding Lane, and the one in England had a St. Mary's open street fire. So here, Boston here, you have a woman named Mary Morse, the street fire. So already you have got these weird similarities. Here we're just told several deaths. I don't know why these weren't punched in yet. And you have 6 here in this England one. And like I said, we're just kind of going through this and just to kind of give you an insight into the research. Like I said, I have not reached any conclusion here yet. This one in Denmark here, this also was started by a widow. Another woman was blamed. And we will jump to this one in Stockholm, Sweden. Fire of 1759, which was the greatest one since the last Great Fire of 1686. 300 houses, no deaths. And here we're told also the house is made of wood. They did not have any professional firefighters at the time, although we're told that fires are a serious threat. References to a few other great fires here. And now we're told Sweden had over 30 devastating fires. In 1751, in 1616, yet still no fire department for some reason. We're not given a reason for it, other than it started in Trouble Hill area. The Mary Magdalena Church catches fire. And lack of water, inferior equipment. After the fire, the city government required all constructions to be consistent of brick and stone. So quite early on, we are learning that brick or stone is the move there. Boston knew about it in 1659. So you would think that 200 years later, they would no longer have to make these regulations because the world is learning that wood catches fire, right? This is what you would think. 1760, Great Boston Fire. 349 buildings and several ships in port. We are not told how, but we are told that this one spread to a quantity of gunpowder and weapons, causing an explosion. Not Pudding Lane this time, but Pie Alley. And you'll always find that, much like any fire, which isn't suspicious, it's just why fires usually happen, is the wind is aggressive always and also changes direction. So March 17th, you have this happen with this gunpowder blowing up on Griffin's Wharf. 3 days later, again, you have a large deposit of gunpowder that caused a huge explosion heard as far away as Hampton, New Hampshire. Yet, no casualties. The aftermath, the area was quickly rebuilt. New brick houses. The old meeting house was replaced with new brick structures, became known as the Old Brick Church, despite it being actually brand new, and divided into fire districts, and empowered to demolish houses next time. So we're learning as a society, we're growing and learning. The Great Fire of Tartu. This is in Estonia. The buildings in this part of the town were built of wood because there were orders that no stone buildings were to be built anywhere from the Tsar. 1775, the backyard of Knight Street. Strong wind. Fire crosses the river. Destroys 200 wooden buildings, and 18 were destroyed to create fire breaks. So all but 40 left standing. After the fire, the new stone buildings was reversed, and now it was required to construct without using wood. Okay, now we have New Orleans, 1788. Here's a map here. This is the area that was destroyed on Good Friday. Massive fire went up through the city. city, destroyed 850 buildings, and we're told rebuilding had scarcely begun when there was a second fire and 2 hurricanes. On December 8th, 212 buildings were consumed by flames. But we're told there's an original fire in New Orleans in 1788. It was Good Friday, and so the church would not allow the townsfolk to ring the bells because it was Good Friday. So no one was allowed to spread the word or raise the alarm. 80% of the city burns down thanks to the church. There was no fire department, and it started at this is an odd one, but it started at there was a Spanish paymaster who left like 300 candles lit at his house and went to church. I mean, 300 candles? Like, what are you doing there? You'd think that someone would be a little smarter than that. I mean, that's just begging for a fire. But so here, 856 of these structures were destroyed, and then later on, 6 years later, the remaining 212 were destroyed. So that would be, yes, that's exactly right. All of the buildings, all 1,100 of the buildings, basically, in New Orleans. And then they had to rebuild in a different style. Shocking. Yeah, priests refused to allow church bells to be rung as an alarm. And now they had to replace the wooden buildings with masonry structures, brick walls, yada, etc., etc. And most of these come with some devastating report that's written in, terrible language, like, if the imagination could describe what our senses enable us to feel from sight and touch, reason itself would recoil in horror. But the sight of an entire city in flames is more horrible to behold than the suffering and pitiable condition in which everyone was involved. General bewilderment, looting, families weeping, the tears, the heartbreaking sobs, the pallid faces of the wretched people. And we're told this is why there's no French-style architecture in the city, which I don't even think that's true. So a little suspicious there that the first ones that didn't burn then were burnt down. A little suspicious on how it started there. And again, this is 130 years after Boston had passed a law about only having stone and brick buildings. So you would think that by now we would have not been building things with wood. Oh, but it's only 1788. There's a lot of fires to go. 1802, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which you'll find this place burned down multiple times. But this one, 3 Portsmouth fires, all at Christmas. Destroyed 500 buildings within a decade, but miraculously no one died in any of the 3. And it's the fires that turned the city to brick. The first fire started early in the morning on Christmas in an old wooden building downtown, destroyed 100 homes. Bucket brigades failed, and the whole beauty of the town was gone. Gone! First disaster relief ever for the Congress. 4 years later, gobbled up a new row of wooden buildings, and exactly 7 years after the second fire, well, almost, Mrs. Woodward's barn, allegedly by an angry servant. So a woman's barn. Again, 300 buildings, and now this time we've had enough. And 250 years after Boston, and nearby Boston had already passed a law requiring burning brick and stone buildings, New Hampshire passes the Brick Act to be built with brick with a slate roof. Wow, thank you. Because no one from Boston ever went to New Hampshire and spread this word at all. It took 3 fires in 150 years. I mean, maybe. Here, then we jumped 3 years later. We got the June 11th, everything caught fire. Everything was destroyed. It started in the stables of a local baker. No mention of Pudding Lane, though, or Pie Alley this time. Hot ashes from a pipe. Did I put that in there? Hot ashes from my baker's stable. I did, and you'll see why I'm putting pipe here. Pipe ashes, I'll add. And again, we have no casualties. And oddly, while Mrs. Woodward's barn started the one in Portsmouth, here we have an Augustus Woodward who created a street plan modeled after D.C., and he happened to just show up right after this fire. And they just immediately trusted this territorial judge to lay out the new grid of the new city. Here's the flag of Detroit, memorializing the event, which is what we're told anyway. All right, well, let me see it, huh? Very well. We'll zoom in. Here it is. See, here's one woman looking at the flames, and then over here we have a new domed building of the future. Very interesting. Although this flag wasn't adopted until 1948. 1811, we have a fire in Newburyport. And again, here's one that's also mentioned in 1934. Oh, there it goes behind a paywall this time, eh? Well, one of the greatest things that ever happened in Newburyport, we're told. May 31st, 1811, in a stable again by an arsonist. Wind in different directions, 250 buildings, which led to the Brick Act of 1811 and the Brick Act of 1812. So the reason why we're the prettiest little town in all of New England is due to these acts, mandating that stone and brick be used for construction. Well, how about that? Out of the fire has come a phoenix, said some random person. Starting to see a trend here? Or is it just me? Now let's jump over here to Kiev, here in Russia, July 9th, 1811. Fire lasted for 3 days, almost destroyed the entire neighborhood. High winds, severe droughts, the usual suspects, children playing with fire. The official version, more than 2,000 homes destroyed. In 1812, they drew up a new plan. No more curved streets, we're going to do a grid, and The fire showed the vulnerability of the city's wooden buildings, later constructed in stone. So all the way over there in Russia, we're learning the same lessons at the same time, despite that civilization being relatively ancient. How about that? We're going to skip a few here that are war-related here. This one's not. Tirschenreuth, Germany. Let's see what's going on in Germany. 1814, around the same time as Portsmouth, New Hampshire's passing the Brick Act. Here you have a small town in the east of Bavaria and completely destroyed. A toy maker's barn because of his wife. Just a few buckets in town. No realistic prospect of stopping the fire. Half the Church of the Ascension of the Virgin Mary survived. 907 buildings destroyed. Here we're told it took 5 years to rebuild. That seems reasonable. Savannah, Georgia. Here we got fire ordinance prohibiting the construction of wooden chimneys. Okay, so Georgia's up on it. This is in the 1700s. Yet still, a fire in another bake shop destroys 229 buildings, leading to an improvement in the fire department. And 17 years later, second devastating fire, 463 buildings. Now, so here's the one in 1796. This one started in a livery stable, another stable. How about that? Strong winds, and this one also struck illegally stored gunpowder. Within 4 months, reconstruction efforts had been underway, and within a few years, many of them had been replaced with brick and stone. For the nation's history, despite no deaths associated with the incident, hundreds of buildings lost, moved quickly to rebuild the town. Edinburgh, 1824, an engraving workshop on High Street, a brand new permanent fire brigade as late as 1824, In a storied city like Edinburgh. They had difficulty locating water supply. Rather incompetent are these cities. You'd think they just barely learned how to use candles. 400 homes, and a mention of all the big cathedrals and buildings that were rebuilt. We'll skip the forest fires here. Here's a great fire of Turku in 1827. Fire jumped the river, destroyed 75% of the city, cathedrals, and most of the people were not around. They happened to be visiting a market that day. 27 deaths this one. We're told every record from the Middle Ages was lost. Now we developed, after the fire, a brand new grid plan. Seems to be a very popular reaction, doesn't it? April 3rd, 1829, Augusta, Georgia. Arson suspected, which is also very common. 500 buildings. Meanwhile, armed men begin gathering looking for the arsonist. That's how the story ends. Another one in Fayetteville. This one in May, 1831. This one started in a kitchen, crossed the creek, devoured all the churches, of course. The townsfolk blew up their homes and shops to deprive the flames of fuel. 600 buildings burned, every house, 2 banks, 2 hotels, all the churches. But amazingly, no one died. Churches rebuilt far more quickly than they imagined within a year's time. And because of this, the capital moved to a different place, which is another story that you see multiple times throughout these histories, is that the capital, it also happened in Turku, moved to a different place because of this fire. Here we got another one here. And of course, I'm only giving the ones I have links here to. You see here, there's fires here all through St. John's, Newfoundland, had 3 here, 1816, 1817. Ponce, Puerto Rico, which you'll find out has multiple fires throughout the years. This is the first major one in New York. And a coal stove destroyed 600 buildings. The brick industry flourished during the rebuilding process as brick replaced the former wooden buildings. Almost 200 years after Boston already knew that this would happen, that after Boston had passed a law regarding wooden buildings not being built, still we're learning this lesson for some reason in New York and everywhere else. It's really bizarre, isn't it? And here they detail the struggles about axemen trying to get through the ice to the river water, and pouring brandy into the engine to keep it running, and brandy in their boots to keep their socks loose. It's a strong brandy. And here they're blowing up buildings again to form a fire break, using gunpowder, barrels of gunpowder. Now the mayor got a little gunpowder crazy and was blowing up everything. 674 buildings destroyed, but rebounded quickly and rebuilt on a grander scale. That was 1834. Here you have in Charleston, 1838. Leveled at least a fourth of the center of the city. 500 properties burned. Well, I'm sorry, at least 1,100 buildings altogether, beginning in a shed behind Mrs. Babson's house. First, though, it was blamed on a bakery, but the baker denied it. Here we're told in the Old Burnt District, the area of the 1835 fire was salvageable despite interior damage. This is 1838, of course, so they were referencing a fire that had already burned here in 1835. Here it's referenced 3 times. 2 churches that had originally burned in 1835, so 3 years later. And this one we're told that the cisterns ran dry, and this one has spurred a cultural awakening where all buildings were built with Greek revival after this. Wow. Thanks to that fire, Charleston, just got a cultural awakening. Now this one here, we're told the Great Fire of Hamburg, the pictures published from it were the the first news pictures ever, and it too was rebuilt in brick, and they destroyed many buildings, including the City Hall. Here in Pittsburgh, a nearby barn or shed, poor water pressure. The city was shortly rebuilt afterwards. Only 2 people died. Spurred the city to greater growth. No water pressure, again from the hoses. The city destroyed. A desperate report in the newspaper. The city was shortly rebuilt with stone, brick, and iron. Spurred the city to greater growth. 1845, New York. Fire started in a candle manufacturing establishment full of whale oil. This one also hit a fertilizer and gunpowder storage, which caused a massive explosion. 345 buildings destroyed. This one actually did kill 30 people. This is the third of New York's great fires. I should have mentioned here that we're told they built 500 buildings in 2 months. That's how fast they rebuilt it. Just a heads up there. 1846, St. John's great fire. And a cabinet maker's workshop with seal oil this time. Last time it was a candle maker with whale oil. 2,000 buildings destroyed. Second of 3 great fires for St. John's. And again, we have crowded, narrow downtown streets made of wood, a new act requiring brick or stone construction and fire breaks, and the widening of streets. This one is blamed on a pot of glue at the cabinet shop, which boiled over on Queen and King Street. And this one had hit a wooden house also. The one casualty was killed because of the explosion, and the vats of seal oil that they kept on the edge of the harbor set the water on fire. Here we go, Great Fire of Toronto, 1849. On King Street again. Fire begins in a stable oil loft at the back of a tavern. The northeast side of King and Nelson. Limited fire equipment. Poorly maintained water systems. The bells of the cathedral used the fire alarm, but the keys were only available at the city hall. So someone had to run to get the keys and unlock the church and ring the bell. A great system. And only one fatality, the owner of the newspaper. Most of the properties were rebuilt by the end of the year. So since this fire happened in April, that'd be within 8 months, the city changed the building code after the fire to prevent wood destruction. The same year, we have the of St. Louis, 1849. This one actually is a rarity. This one started with a steamboat that was on fire that drifted into other steamboats and set 22 other boats on fire. And this spread to the city. And here we're blowing up businesses with kegs of black powder. 430 buildings destroyed. Only 3 people had died. And a new building code requiring structures to be built of stone or brick. Around Montreal, 1850. 200 houses burned down. 1 or 2 women burned to death. At Montreal, 1852. Destroyed half the city's housing, while the reservoir was drained and closed for repairs. The first fire broke out at a tavern. Now keep in mind, it almost seems like ad-libs in a way where you've just got a few things that keep getting recycled. You got another. The Great Charleston Fire, 1861. December 11th. Slave refugees started it, they think. 14 houses were blown up to create a block. No deaths recorded. There's a picture of it, allegedly. Looks like it's made of brick to me. And this is what we're told, is that there were 1,000 buildings lost. But luckily, with so many structures lost, many residents fled, and that's when the federal troops started shelling the city. The bombs fell to the abandoned, already devastated district. So 2 years later, there was no one in the city still? That's weird. 1 year later, the Great Fire of Troy. 500 to 600 buildings destroyed. May 11th, sparks from an engine caught the bridge on fire, which caught the boats on fire. 8 people died, but Troy quickly rebuilt within 6 months after the fire. Here she is after the fire, we're told. Looks like a little model. Doesn't look real. But like I said, I won't get too much in the pictures this time. Same year, 1863, San Francisco, in a rag store. This time they were saved by 200 Russian sailors. The Great Fire of Brisbane. Another Queen Street, 50 houses, no loss of life, and we're told that 2 fires occurred the same year. First one also on Queen Street, this one at a drapery in the cellar. Following the fire, the rebuilding used more stone and brick. 1866, the fire up in Portland, Maine. Cigar ash likely in a boathouse. 2 people died. 1,800 buildings burned to the ground, and they built 600 buildings within 4 months after the fire. 1866, Grizzly Flat, California, destroyed by fire. Every house but 2 originated in an outbuilding where a drunk Indian was sleeping. This is the part of the Great Michigan Fire, which burned a number of cities, a total of 1.2 million acres. This is more of a forest fire, but it's the same night that the Chicago fire happened and the Peshtigo fire happened in Wisconsin. Very interesting. These would all happen in the same time. Chicago fire, we all know all about that one. Mrs. Leary's cow kicked over a lantern in a barn or whatever. Boston fire, again, 1872, 700 176 buildings. This time, at least 30 people died. Here we're told in 1872 there was no strictly enforced building code in Boston. But how can that be? Because we were told earlier that in 1659 they had a building code that was requiring stone or brick with a slate roof. So what, 200 years later and multiple fires, we just got rid of it? Very strange, isn't it? You'd think after multiple fires burned down your entire city, you wouldn't forget. This one also started in the basement of a warehouse. This one also used gunpowder to blow up buildings, although it wasn't effective. Actually killed some people. And of course, now after the fire, we're going to restructure the layout of the roadways, widen the roads. Same story over and over again. 1873, Portland, Oregon. Started with another furniture store, fueled by the oils and varnishes. Wind in all directions. About 300 buildings. Herbert has also mentioned that 8 months prior, there was another fire which had started in a Chinese laundry facility by possibly anti-Chinese arsonists. 1 year later, Boston has yet another fire. This one's got a whole book written about it. You think they just never learn, do they? This one also started in a furniture warehouse with lots of varnish, 100 buildings, 0 casualties. The Chicago fire real quick. 1871 here, Miss O'Leary's granddaughter said that a man named Peglin Sullivan knocked over Lantern while looking for a beer for a party, huh? I thought it was a cow. Well, oh yeah, here it is. The most popular tale blames the cow, which knocked over Leonard. Either way. Fire across the river. This one killed actually 300 people. Here you got a fire in Deadwood, South Carolina that destroyed 300 buildings. Great Seattle fire here. 1889. Quickly rebuilt using brick buildings. Started because an overheated glue pot again. New building ordinance resulted in brick and stone only. Approximately 1 month later in Washington, you have the Great Ellensburg Fire, destroying 200 homes and buildings. Started potentially by Indians. 1889, the Great Bakersfield Fire. 196 buildings, 1 man was killed. Mrs. Kelsey's Sunday dinner was blamed. Not enough water pressure in the line. Rebuilt quickly, planning a town 3 or 4 times bigger. Most of the buildings rebuilt larger and grander with brick and ornate decorative style. And on and on and on it goes here. And we are barely even, we're not even in 1900 yet. So the patterns that I see here developing are pretty obviously the origin, or it's, the trend is that it's a warehouse or a manufacturer plus their material. So a cabinet maker in the varnish, a candle maker in the whale oil, a pot of glue at the cabinet makers, or it's a stable, or a shed, or a tavern belonging to a woman. Here's a few: started a Chinese bathhouse, a Chinese house, a drunk Indian, a rag store, often arsonist, and the deaths for a lot of these fires are kind of unreasonable, especially when you don't have the emergency precautions like we have today, and the way that they say they spread so fast with wind in all directions. I mean, here's 300 buildings in Stockholm destroyed, no casualties. 85% of New Orleans burns down, very few casualties. Portsmouth, New Hampshire, no casualties. Detroit, entire city burns down, no casualties. The ones I don't have listed here because they're just not mentioned. Augusta, Georgia, 500 buildings, no casualties. 600 buildings in North Carolina, no casualties. New York, 700 buildings, 2 casualties. 1,100 buildings in Charleston, 1 casualty. Pittsburgh, third of the city burns down, 2 casualties. 500 buildings in New York, Albany burns down, 2 casualties. Part of that seems unrealistic to me. The amount of times that gunpowder or explosions are involved is basically every one that has any sort of write-up on it at all. Here's San Francisco, twice, Michigan, or Missouri, Canada. It's either they do it intentionally, like here in Hamburg, Germany, South Carolina, New York, North Carolina, or there's some hidden storage pot that gets hit. But possibly the amount of times that there's not enough water pressure here, or there's no fire department at all. Especially in these later ones, like 1851, they don't have a fire department. For 200 years, buildings been burning down, and you don't have a fire department, or there's not enough water pressure, which happens time after time again. Perhaps the most telling that you find in nearly every single, no matter what country around the world that you see, or state, or era, over a 300-year period, the aftermath of the fire is the same. Rebuilt of brick and stone, wider streets. New regulations requiring brick and stone. Wood banned. New grid, brick act. Grid and stone, brick act. Quickly rebuilt. Mostly rebuilt. New building codes with brick. New building codes with brick. Rebuilt with brick. Rebuilt quickly in preposterous times, like 500 buildings in 2 months. Rebuilt in 8 months. Rebuilt in 3 weeks. This story in San Francisco says, rebuilt within 3 weeks, some being rebuilt on one end while the other was still on fire. Give me a break. New city layout. Brick and stone rebuild. Rebuild in 6 months in the case of Troy, New York. 600 buildings in 4 months in Portland, Maine. So either these stories are all true, and there's remarkable coincidences, and nobody learns the past 200 years, despite having ordinances as early as the 1600s, and some of these cities are ancient. No one ever learned until roughly around the same time where the whole city burned down. No one ever learned from any other city, any other newspaper, nothing. They had to literally have the whole town burned down, figured out for themselves that they need a fire department, adequate water pressure, and the grid structure, and wider streets, and no more wooden buildings. Or some of the stories are true, and later on, the later fires were untrue, many of them, and they just borrowed details heavily from the earlier story. Okay, possible. The third option is that most of these stories are not true. Most of them are completely fabricated to serve some end. Or possibly the stories are true, and the fires are intentionally started. Well, what would be the motive? Well, one obviously would be to destroy remnants of the history of the old world. Destroy anything that doesn't fit the new narrative, or the paradigm you're trying to enforce. Widen the streets to accommodate for vehicles that you know are coming, and destroy symbolism and things like that. The problem with that one is that a lot of these were just rebuilt, and a ton of these do have these old structures, these old cathedrals and things. They rebuilt them, which leads me to the next possible motive, which is that these fires did not happen. They controlled the press, and so the newspapers would happen. Maybe they'd make a show of blowing up a few buildings, causing such a great wall of fire and smoke, and then hurting all the town people outside, like you see in the pictures where they're all standing on the hill of San Francisco looking down, fabricating some of the pictures in the newspapers, making sure that the people, the residents, are stay away, we gotta build you a tent city out here, we're gonna rebuild the town, and within 4 months we'll let you back in, that sort of thing. And really, the rebuilt, something like that. Or most of the fire stories did not happen, and they're simply constructed as a way to build the story that we, as in Americans, or we, the modern inhabitants, constructed these buildings, and the fires never happened. We did it. You know we did. We built these old stone brick buildings because you remember the Great Fire of 1750. Look at the newspaper article. It says right here, the whole city burned down. We rebuilt it. It says right there. And you see this in places like Copenhagen, old cities where it's like, yeah, everything burned down, but all the buildings they look old, but they're new, 1850, 1900, everywhere you go. So that's a potential motive. And I think that the tell is the phrasing, quickly rebuild. All the brick acts that were passed from Finland to Denmark to Japan to wherever. The reaction to these fires are the same, though they've been allegedly happening for hundreds of years. It's a very curious thing, the amount of overlap and the amount of similarities in these stories and a lot of these pictures. I mean, I think that ones that are happening later in the 1900s where it's just single buildings, these are concentrated, isolated attempts to take out the old world. Before they had to do that, they had to construct a narrative of that we built them. So while they may take them apart now, and while they may isolate certain buildings now to destroy the history, I think these great fires, they were to build the narrative that we built them. Therefore, later on down the line when they burn down or we destroy them, that's for a different purpose altogether. Perhaps once this new era of people sort of begin to repopulate these cities, we realize that we can't keep up this infrastructure. We lack the ability. We're not progressing in that way, or we're just too distracted. We aren't building the same way. Then it becomes obvious the more time goes on that these other older buildings stand out. And so now you've got to isolate. Now you've got to destroy them. Fire here and there. Dynamite here and there. So it seems to me like it's two parts because it works two ways. The fire works to either destroy the old world or it works to build a narrative that we built it. But this is a very interesting, to me, subject. And the great concentration of them during that time frame is an interesting investigation. So I just maybe got a little long-winded, but I was just trying to give you a little sneak peek at the progress. And I'm really curious as to what you all think. What you got any theories or anything I might have missed in some of these, or does this just all seem normal to you? Or all the mentions of the same street names and the same reactions, is this all just a coincidence, or is there something vastly suspicious here? I'm curious to know your thoughts. I'll let you go for now, but I'll see you soon.